I'm going to teach you my secrets that got me to Challenger US once again. You will learn when to go QMax, when to go RMax, all the build variations, all the rune pages, skill orders, and so on. If you guys don't know me, I'm Arcteos, also known as Aribo, and I've been playing Udyr for many years. Primarily Udyr, and I got Challenger with this character many times before. If you guys are not familiar with this space, I've been doing most of the trends on this character for years, and pretty much everybody that is high rank on U and NA playing Udyr has been watching me quite a bit and studying my concepts. Some of them I know personally. I'm kind of like the father of all Udyr players. And of course, Trick2G is the grandfather, because I started playing Udyr in Season 3 because of him, watching his videos and stuff. Pretty good stuff, Trick2G the GOAT. So, before we start, all of these item sets will be on my Patreon, and there you can also purchase an Udyr matchups guide. You can learn all of the matchups and some tips on what to build and what to do with your early packing and stuff like that in those matchups. Anyways, we're just gonna go slowly, create new item set, and I'm going to explain to you first of all what you build for your first item, what are the options here. In one at a time you'll see you'll default to Liandry. And we want to make this easy to understand regardless of whether you are Emerald or a pro player or you are Jinxie and just started playing the game, okay? We're gonna call this root, which is just the first item that we are going to build. And we're gonna look at the strengths and weaknesses of this item, which is the most common for RMax AP Udyr, Liandry. But we also have to understand why do we go ability power. Why not start with Sunfire or Heartsteel? It's because Udyr has a damage cap on Q against monsters. Only against monsters, works on the normal Q and on the awaken Q. So if you don't build either AD or AP on your first item, your Q against monsters is going to deal very little damage, it's going to clear poorly. And then of course you generally want some kind of durability because Udyr is a Juggernaut. There is an exception, but you don't want to build, let's say, Shadow Flame first item. You're probably gonna blow up. Not very smart. Some health, armor, MR would be useful. And these are just the options for AP fighter items in the game. You have no gap closer. So Liandry's Torment simply does the most damage. Consistently does the most damage because of the max health burn. Udyr doesn't have like super insane AP ratios or something. So this is just the easiest way to DPS opponents. And it's going to be great at zoning and poking with your R Awaken and kiting melee characters. Udyr is sort of mid-range champion. You have to be able to use his strengths. You're not going to constantly auto-attack opponents when you build Liandry for the most part. Okay. But this is generally going to be good with AP builds to amplify with some kind of magic pen or damage amplification. It's also going to give you pretty good base damage to work with like full tank builds. You can go Liandry into full tank potentially, right? But you can also go more AP heavy to fully abuse the zone control effect with burn effects. This is the main strength of Liandry. But the first big concept that you have to understand in this guide about Udyr is that there are going to be games where Liandry is lackluster, it just doesn't have much value. When do you think would that be? Well, it's against champions with a lot of mobility that easily get out of the R Awaken or simply disengage you. And characters that have auras and healing and sustain like Senna, Sona. Could be even Karma with a Mantra Shield, Seraphine. Against those characters, it's not easy to dot them, to poke them, to do any kind of zone control because, you know, Seraphine is just gonna press W and completely nullify your R Awaken. So in those cases, you have to adapt a bit and either go for an option that has more stats or something that just simply helps you in the other mode, which is if you cannot use your range power, you have to use your auto attacks. And when you look at the health AP items, you're right away gonna see, for example, Riftmaker. And when you analyze this item a bit, you'll see that it just has more AP, 15 haste, and more damage amplification. So those things are going to close the gap between the burn and Riftmaker, plus this item gives you significantly more durability. It's 100 gold more expensive, but that doesn't matter too much. So right away, I can think, well, I'm playing versus Sona and Seraphine. I can't really do much with Liandry's here. Maybe they don't have health stacking characters like Skarner, Mundo, Scion, which is where Liandry can also shine a bit, but it's really strong at zoning these squishy champions and poking them, like a Vayne, for example. You drop R Awaken on her head, when she tumbles forward, she loses a lot of HP, she gets zoned out of the fight potentially. That's like the control of Udyr. Which, again, in this situation, Sona Seraphine makes more sense to build Riftmaker. So, this is an option we can consider. Riftmaker is also going to be great at being a bit more of a frontliner, if you just want to stat check people in mid-range, and it still has this AoE damage amplification with a bit higher AP than other items to make our Awaken consistent. And you cannot really go wrong with Riftmaker. To be fair, both Liandry and Riftmaker first item are pretty good, it's just that they fulfill a bit different niches. And Riftmaker is going to be great with like an unending despair second item. We'll talk a bit about these things later. And yeah, it's just going to be great against teams with low damage output, low DPS. Then you can just sustain all of their damage and kind of become immortal with Riftmaker. Definitely allows you to play more with your auto decks in melee range, while with Liandry you usually get stat checked by a bunch of things if you directly fight people, because the item has little stats, so you have to adapt. Now I'm going to go with Rocket Belt. I've also noticed that some Korean top laners are building this on Udyr, so it further incentivizes my bias towards this item. It's very cheap, it has pretty good stats, 20 haste, and a dash outplay potential. I would like to build it against characters that have certain powerful skill shots that you can dodge and get a lot of value from this item. You can dodge Kiana ult, you can dodge Yone ult, you can dodge like Mordekaiser's full rotation when he realms you and make him kind of useless. So there are a lot of uses, you just have to think and gain some experience if it's maybe dodgeable with Rocket Belt or not. But either way, the item will spike really quickly. So it can be useful for ganking, being strong early, but it will be lackluster in terms of some clear speed in mid-game. Just a little bit, and it will also be lackluster at DPSing in general. But of course the active does like 3 ticks worth of Liandry damage in most cases, so top of that you can also stack Conqueror. And if the enemy team is a bit too tanky or stat tricky, I would not really consider this item. But I really like to build it, for example, in Lilia matchup. You get 20 haste, your E and R are lower cooldown. It's easier to catch up to her. You can dash on top of her, dodge the blade of her Q, and in general I would play her. It's gonna be harder for her to space you. Just this item is gonna be strong if you want to be some sort of main engage. Maybe you're playing versus like a Zerat or Caitlyn or something like that, and you just really want to go in with Rocket Belt, E-Awaken, and set it up for your team. So there are a couple uses of this item, you just have to gain some experience. Hopefully I gave you some good enough tips for you to understand. The next option for me is Dusk and Dawn. And you guys would probably think that you maybe love this item, some of you maybe hate this item and you think it's completely pointless on Udyr, and I'll just explain why I think it's good. Dusk and Dawn? Well, it's kind of like a Shin for AP Trinity Force. If you compare it to this, you are just getting some on-hit damage, 20 haste, 20 attack speed. So automatically you can have similar combat value, but Dusk and Dawn also has a lot of sustain and utility, because you can refund your Awaken quicker, and you can also proc press the attack very easily with the double hit. It works with PTA, and you also get the attack speed. So combining these things, you will have these short windows of damage where you can play a bit in and out. It's similar to old Udyr, if you know what I'm talking about. You can do like R, double proc the R, E someone, run out, W, wait for some other cooldowns, maybe wait for your Awaken to come back up, and you will have these cycles where it's going to be very fluid, and that's going to, of course, excel against these targets that don't let you hit them that often, that might sustain your damage, might have some enchanters. That's where I would like to use Dusk and Dawn. And you also have to get this foresight. This is your skill ceiling on the champion. Dusk and Dawn is going to be really useful at getting to your second Awaken. So if you have a game where you think that this is going to bring you after level 11 to your second Awaken pretty easily, then you might get even more value out of this item. And the way you utilize it, since it double procs your passive, you lose the attack speed for the second auto deck, is you just spam all of your abilities. You will have a lot of abilities with this, so you just try to use a different skill like every second, pretty much when the global cooldown between your abilities allows it. Now, if you still don't understand when to build Dusk and Dawn, then you can just ask me some more questions in the comments, because it's a bit complicated, and I have some videos on this on my second channel, so make sure to check that out. Now, the exception here with health is Lichbane. So with Lichbane, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and how do we get around the fact that this item has seemingly no defensive stats, no health? Well, 100 AP, as I mentioned, it has the monster cap on the Q, giving you an insane clear, plus the Shin, which does quite a lot of damage, equivalent of 3-4 seconds of Liandry dot, and imagine you can do that every 1.5 to 2 seconds. Lichbane is just going to give you the best clear speed possible, and it's also relatively cheap. It's below 3k gold. Movement speed and haste and AP, they all make you a bit tankier. You have HP ratios on W, but you also have pretty good AP ratios. So it's not purely glass cannon. We are not going like an Infinity Edge or something, right? It still makes you a bit tankier. And if you circumvent that with Resolve runes, or with the green pet, which I always run with Lichbane, then you will realize that you can be even tankier than, let's say, Liandry plus blue pet. It's just gonna be about the early game. And we can talk a bit about the components as well, but Lichbane overall is going to be great against champions that cannot burst you easily, cannot chain CC you easily. If you're allowed to split push, think if the enemy is, let's say, an immobile mage that cannot really rotate easily, and a Soraka that isn't going to do much in side lane, like let's say Pike or Nautilus. So it's going to be up to you to be able to identify these win conditions, but Lichbane is really strong at split pushing because you can hit the towers, you get attack speed, and the Shin proc. And of course the build pet is also pretty strong. I usually start with Blasting One because it's harder to build. It's going to match the Fated Ashes clear speed, then either Wisp and Shin. And they're all amazing components, same thing with Dusk and Dawn. I usually go Blasting Wand, Kindle Gem, Shin, and these are all really useful components for Udyr, despite Dusk and Dawn build pet being kind of bad on most characters. For Udyr it's actually pretty good. And you might be wondering, hey man, if I don't go Fated Ashes, won't my clear speed suck? And it's not really the case because Fated Ashes got nerfed, and the jungle got changed this season, so if you just go Blasting Wand or even double Amp Tome, your clear speed is going to be pretty much about the same, and of course on the second clear usually depends on your first clear execution, and you can only really speed up the last camp a little bit. So it has not as much impact as you would think to go Fated Ashes in early game. Like, you might feel it here and there, but just having Blasting One, for example, is pretty much the same thing because Udyr has pretty high AP ratio on his Q monster cap. Okay, so now that we went over the root items, I want to move to runes. I decided to start with this and then go to runes because it's a bit easier to understand. Okay, the first thing that I want to go over with you guys is this rune page, Deadfire Touch. So, what's the deal with Deadfire Touch? When you compare it to Conqueror, it makes sense. Conqueror on Udyr, sustained fighter, you have some ratios, you can make use of it, you can heal a bunch. But with Deadfire Touch, not only you don't have to think about this rune, it's easier to use, especially if you're not that good at Udyr, but it just does more damage at all points, and the tree for it is pretty interesting, sorcery. Because you get Axiom Arcanist, so with Axiom Arcanist, you deal more damage on your Awaken, it even works against Masters, and you are getting 12% increased heal and shield on your W. Celerity Water Walking makes your early game strong, so overall this page, all of these runes have a pretty big impact in early game, in Scuttle Crab fights, in early Dragon and Grab fights, so it's hard to go wrong with it. It's pretty noob friendly to play Deadfire Touch with Liandry. And I would only go this with Liandry because it makes the most sense. You are doubling down on the burn effects, on the zone, and on the fact that when I play Liandry with Deadfire Touch, I'm not really auto-attacking people, I'm not really stacking Conqueror that much. Now, it might sound strange to you, like, what do you mean you are not auto-attacking people with Udyr? But you're just trying to use your range, trying to use your R-Awaken. Maybe you drop R-Awaken in the fight, and then you go refund your passive on a jungle camp, go back in with another R-Awaken. That's kind of how you're looking to play Udyr at a high level. So, as I said, the burn is just going to even be incentivizing you to go for sustained fights, because it just almost doubles the burn damage, and you just have to do this calculation with Udyr's AP. Well, R, 30% AP ratio per second. If you have Conqueror fully stacked, how much damage is it going to deal versus Deathfire Touch? Well, I can tell you Deathfire Touch just does more damage overall as a rune, so it's never going to be too bad. And I would say that you should probably default to this page, especially if you're like not that good on Udyr, because it's just going to give you a strong early game and consistent damage. You don't have to think about much. Triumph, Legend Haste. Legend Haste is very important on Udyr because it just has a compounding effect. You scale your mobility, durability, damage, and crowd control with 15 haste. It's quite a bit of haste. Transcendence is only 10. Rune Shard is only 8, but Legend Haste hard to ignore with 15. And then Triumph just has a lot of reliability as a jungler. Not only you can do some stuff in teamfights and outplay people with the healing, it's visible impact. We know Triumph is playing a big part in a lot of situations, but also the 20 gold on a large sample size, you will notice that it will allow you to complete an item or get an extra component. So I really prefer Triumph over going any of these runes, which are also conditional, but I just think that Triumph is a more reliable, more useful condition. It's a pretty broken rune for like melee fighter characters. And then you want to go double adaptive shard because of the previously mentioned damage cap on Q. This plays a huge part on your early game clear. And it also does scale pretty well, and it also gives you a bit more durability from your W ratio. So always go double adaptive on Udyr. If you go attack speed or if you go, let's say, movement speed, you will lose a lot of time on your first clear, and that will have a pretty bad effect on your overall performance, because you will not be able to make it in time to scatter grab sometimes, or you will not be able to cross to the other crab, you'll not be able to get a chance to kill an enemy jungler on river, and there are a bunch of things like that. I really strongly insist you should go with double adaptive. And of course, scaling health, it evens out at level 6-7. But when I'm playing against certain things, I will go tenacity slow resist. But it's not just for the tenacity, because you don't really care about being CC'd as Udyr that much, since your R will go around you and still slow and damage enemies. It doesn't matter if you're CC'd or not, or whatever. This is important when you're actually getting kited. This is the keyword, kited. If it's hard to reach enemies, to stick to them, to catch up to them, and they have both some kind of CCs and slows at the same time. You don't just go it for the tenacity. They have to have some kind of slows, and of course it's a double effect against slows, because it only, not only it reduces the duration of the slow, but also the effectiveness of the slow. So when you're against, let's say, Lissandra and Ashe, it's a pretty good idea to think about this rule. Now, if they have really bursty characters and a bunch of CC, I would always prefer health, because I don't want to get one shot where I'm CC'd. Okay, now let's say you are going Conqueror. What are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of this rune? Well, I would say that the main strength for me with Conqueror is that it allows you to go for different threes. If you go Deathfire Touch, you are Sorcery and Precision. You cannot go Inspiration, you cannot go Domination, you cannot go Resolve. But with Conqueror, you have the option to go those things secondary, and they can be useful. They can be really useful. And of course it's going to be strong with this more sustained fighting, auto-attacking items if I'm going for those type of situations, right? Those types of builds. If I'm going Riftmaker, Conqueror is great. If I'm going Rocket Belt, Conqueror is also pretty good. And also with Leechbane, because it has a high AP ratio that will scale with Conqueror pretty well. And we will usually go Cut Down, but not always. We'll understand this better in a second, because Udyr can poke and zone people with R Awaken when they're full life. So it makes sense to go Cut Down. And then what I usually take for secondary runes if I care about Conqueror, and this is mostly I'm going Conqueror to take a triple tonic plus approach velocity, because I care about not being kited by Lilia or Ashe or sticking to a Hecarim. This is where approach velocity can be really useful, but you have to make sure that it's not redundant, because there are going to be a lot of situations where approach velocity doesn't really matter, because you can already stick to targets easily, so you would rather have something else. It's a lot of movement speed, it can be pretty broken, it can make Udyr feel quite obnoxious. But why do we go triple tonic and not magical footwear with approach velocity, which used to be kind of meta, by the way, also a trend popularized by me within the Udyr player base. It's kind of easy to compare these runes in my opinion for Udyr. At level 9 you get more movement speed, so you already get a bit more value than the 10 MS from magical footwear. So now all you have to do is get 300 gold value out of this rune. At level 3 we get 60 gold. So now we only have to get 240 gold value. One way to get gold value is being able to buy boots early, and that can give you a kill or a gank or a camp, or you can maybe escape from a bad situation. So that's the first thing that can give you this 240 gold value to close the gap. And then at level 3, because you get a gold, it can allow you to get a component. And because of that component, you can win a fight and get some gold. You can also deny stuff from enemies this way, of course. And then at level 6, you might be able to have a certain timer or something, or straight up win a fight because of the extra adaptive force. And that can also give you gold. So there are 3 different ways where you can potentially close the gap of 240 gold in magical footwear, and it's going to have increased effect overall because you might be able to deny things from the enemy as well. And that's why I think this rune is really bad on Udyr, especially because it forces you to not buy boots for usually 10 plus minutes. So I would recommend you never go magical footwear on Udyr, because triple tonic on larger sample sizes will just have, with the same flavor, more value. Okay. Now what happens when I don't care about this mobility? Let's say I just want to have a bit more stats to scale into the enemy comp. Maybe I'm playing against some fighters and bruisers and I still am going for a conqueror page. Then I usually go cashback with jack of all trades. So why cashback? You're just going to give you better spikes, you're going to complete items easier, you're going to have more components, which is going to be similar to a Gathering Storm, except that you also complete items faster. So in that sense, cashback pretty good on Udyr. Why jack of all trades? I want to kind of double down on my stats. If I go cashback, I'm going it for like combat power. And I want another rune that gives me even more combat power, not utility. And I don't care about getting this to 10 stacks, it's like pretty irrelevant, because the rune with 5 stacks to just get the 5 haste 10 adaptive force is already pretty strong. I mean, you get half transcendence and half absolute focus. It's pretty much makes for a whole rune. And you can get even more than that. You can get 7-8 stacks pretty easily. But getting to 5 stacks, very easy on any build. So you shouldn't worry too much about taking jack of all trades. Hey, it gives you some ability power. Good enough for me. Another thing that I like to do in Inspiration is this, which might look weird to you, but Udyr has no terrain scaling, he cannot go over walls. And there are going to be games where I really like Cosmic Insight, just because I'm playing versus, let's say, Jarvan. But you would be surprised how many opportunities you will get to avoid vision, gank people, just go over walls, play a little bit like a Rek'Sai. You can go in the Raptor pit and Hexflash over the wall and gank their mid laner. So in games where laners are really vulnerable, and you want to create some chaos, I really think that this can be viable. It has a learning curve. You might not be able to see it right now if you're like, what the fuck, Hextech Flash Traption on Udyr, what the fuck is that, bruv? It has a lot of value if you know how to use it. And if you compare it to these runes, as long as you get a kill, you get 300 gold, maybe a bit more. And, you know, 1 kill from Hextech is already kind of evening out the gold value from these other runes. So you have to consider, hey, is it actually going to be useful in this game? And play around with it. Definitely worth experimenting in my opinion. Okay, what we like to have when you resolve, and usually if I go resolve, I'm really looking to scrap with people and tanking damage and stuff. So I'll probably go combo it with Last Stand. Conditioning and flinching is great if you are against a lot of damage and assassins and bursts and stuff like that. It's gonna help you in early game a bit, and you can also go Overgrowth, it's fine. But for a character like Udyr, which has very high effective health, Unflinching and Overgrowth are pretty close for most of the game, if you do some effective health calculations. Because this amplifies everything, while Overgrowth is just like a flat amount. So this just has a bit more potential, and you get something that's useful before like first 15 minutes when you get to stack your Overgrowth. That's why I tend to prefer it. All in all, you will be about 10% tankier with this combination, maybe a little bit more, which is really going to pay off against Burst, Chain CC, and Assassins in general. It's just a different way to scale compared to Jack of all trades plus cashback. And in some games where you really think it's gonna be free to go through the early game, any of those pages can be fine to just have a bit more scaling when you think not much is going to happen in the first 15-20 minutes of the game. But that's for you to judge. If I'm against like a team with low damage, and I'm going any of those sustained fighter builds with Riftmaker, Dusk and Dawn, Revitalized Shield Badge can also be very useful. And you have to look at Shield Badge as a damage rune. It's actually, in most cases, consistently out-damages all the other minor runes, and it can even out-damage Kislos. So don't sleep on Shield Badge. Especially if you have an Enchanter, Karma, whatever. Combining it with Revitalize can be really good on Udyr, of course. Especially if you have some healing effects, healing items. And you can get a lot of combat value from these runes. You just have to keep an eye out on it. Well, you'll see. Like, if you have Sona and you feel like you can go any of those items, it's gonna become more clear to you. You just have to look for these things. This is the reason why I'm making this guide. If you look closely at these things, this will be a pretty long video, you will be able to get an extra edge. You will be stronger in that game if you're able to judge the situation correctly. I know it's easy to be lazy and just go for a default build and try not to think, but it's not as hard as you think it is. You just have to learn to look for certain things and gain some experience. Go back to this guide, rewatch it, put it on second monitor, stuff like that. Okay, we also have Domination, and I like Domination in bloody games where it's easy to stack these Hunter runes. If you think that there's gonna be a lot of early game fighting, then you can really pay off big with some of these things because, well, Chip Shot, it does a lot of damage. It's easy to apply this on Armex Udyr. You can permanently have it up. It does a lot of damage, especially against, like, tankier opponents, because it's true damage. And I usually tend to prefer Treasure Hunter. This seems to be the best. You can play the others as well. Relentless Hunter is a bit lackluster on Udyr because he's already pretty fast on the map, and it got nerfed. Treasure Hunter, to get those item spikes early to get some components and get your first item as fast as possible, seems to be a little bit more consistent for this champion from what I have been playing. So I'll just go Cheap Shot Treasure Hunter if you want to pay off from early game fighting. And you'll also end up getting quite a lot of DPS from this Cheap Shot run. It can usually easily out-damage this row. And, you know, I'll usually go like cut down Cheap Shot. It's quite a lot of damage if you want to go for a Conqueror page. I can also go something like this. I don't think it's terrible, I just almost never do it because I'm usually gonna be in Deadfire Touch page if I'm playing Sorcery. So, you guys now have a pretty good idea of the runes that I take on Udyr, except if I'm playing Dusk and Dawn, I'll actually take Press the Attack with any of the mentioned combinations on the secondary, and those will kind of be my runes for Udyr. Now let's go back to the items, and let's talk a bit about the jungle items. The jungle pets. So when you consider the jungle pets, blue pet got nerfed, but it's still pretty useful, pretty good. And it's especially going to excel against stuff that you can space, you can dodge. And things that you might want to have good tempo on the map against. Just like an extra edge against a Lilia or Hecarim to not get ran down by them or to be able to catch up to them. Can be pretty good against Karthus as well. Any of those kind of things. But if you want to just be more stat checky, I'm playing versus Javan, I'm getting ulted anyway. If I'm playing versus some assassin junglers, I'd really prefer the green pet. And of course with Leash Bane and even Dusk and Dawn or Riftmaker, I do prefer to go green shield to be even extra stat checky with those items. While with Liandry and Rocket Belt, I almost always tend to go blue pet. And you can kind of combine them however you want. But with the way Liandry plays, trying to kite and space things, just poke people, blue pet makes more sense. And then red pet is kind of slept on in the sense that the slow lasts for 3 seconds, but Udyr's R has no duration on the slow. If somebody gets out of the zone, the slow is completely gone. And the slow from red pet can help the target be in range. so they get hit by R again and kind of get pulled back in the storm, if you know what I mean. So they can take extra hits from the R Awaken. And then you can double down on Deathfire Touch, plus Liandry, plus Red Pet, and have like pretty strong burn. Can also be a bit useful against, HP stackers like Skarner and Cyan, so that's something to keep an eye out on. When it comes to Rocket Belt, it can trigger the Red Pet from a distance, so that's also a pretty decent synergy that people have been using on a few other characters as well. Okay, now we can start talking about boots. And to be fair, I think boots deserve a video on their own, especially the new Omnivamp boots. I will probably look to make a whole separate video about boots in general, so you guys can learn more on this topic. For me, I think it'll be an interesting topic to discuss. And the default for Udyr is Ionian, in my opinion. And you might be wondering, hey man, I never even buy or consider Ionian on Udyr. What is up with this? What is up with this purchase? And I'm saying it's a default because these have no condition. You get 45 MS and some haste, and they are really cheap. You can buy them whenever you want. They're always good. They are actually never bad. You can always go Ionian. You are going to get faster items. It's just going to make all of your future items technically come earlier, be cheaper. And then you have to consider the conditions which make other boots good. Now, usually people will default to boots of swiftness, but why would I pay 100 more gold just for 10 MS? 10 haste also gives me lower cooldown on my E, so that's also giving me pretty good mobility. And I get cooldown on my Flesh and Smite. Of course, it's not worth just for the 10 MS. This has to be useful for the slow resist, especially if you get kited. Because if I'm not getting kited, well, I don't care that much about the slow resistance. But of course, if I'm against Edge, boost of swiftness can be pretty overpowered even. So this is for the slow resist, for when you get kited. And you have to start to default to Ionian boots, not to boots of swiftness, if you think nothing is particularly good, or you don't know what to buy. And then you work from there as well. If they have a lot of chain CC, maybe some magic damage, you go for Mechanist Threads. If they have a lot of auto-attack damage, and they're going to stat check you, with auto-attacks, you can just be stronger against a bunch of those characters with plated steel caps. But this is rarely even a good boot option, because they have to be pretty heavy on auto-attacks, maybe like 3 auto-attackers usually to justify this. Because the other boots, such as Ionian, they are going to be efficient against all players. They're going to be equally useful against all players on the enemy team. Well, this is only going to be useful if you take auto-attack and physical damage. And even if you took physical damage, if they have mostly casters, it's still not worth to buy plated steel caps, sometimes even if they're almost full AD, because you could just have cloth armor plus Ionian. You get 15 armor and 10 haste instead of 25 armor. I mean, that's still pretty good because you'll be able to buy those stronger legendary items maybe a minute or two earlier, or you can straight up win some fights. You can have like Ionian plus Chain Vest. Chain Vest can be really a strong component, or Warden's Mail, stuff like that. And those are the things that I would consider because, like I said, this is cheap. You can buy components, you can buy a Ruby Crystal, you can buy cloth armor with a gold difference, and you also get lower cooldowns. On your W can make the difference. So with the Omnivamp boots, it's basically every single condition that we have to meet for Ionian, except it's a bit more niche. This will be good in bloody games and also in games where you think you can get away with a more scaling option. Like Ionian are going to be strong early game, they're just like by default right away just giving you the value. But this is a bit more scaling. It has a bit more potential. So you'll have to weigh in the balance. Once again, steel caps aren't good, mercs aren't good, swifties aren't good. You can consider going Omnivamp boots. Clear? This is how I would be looking to build it. Because in some games, yeah, like all 3 of these boots can be pretty bad. Or just kind of lackluster, pointless. So this is for sure a greedier option. Now another greedier option you can go for is Sorcerer Shoes. When you really want to deal as much damage as possible, maybe you are solo AP Udyr and you just want more burst damage, or it's easier to zone the enemy comp. I don't buy this too often, but there's nothing wrong with them. It's simply more damage. Hey, you get some Magic Pen, works well with Liandry, that item only scales with Magic Pen and damage amplifications. and that will be your Sorshu's value. Okay, now we can go over armor items. And the way Udyr scales, you have to realize that you want to be durable, and his W multiplies really well with resistances. Yes, it has a small HP ratio and AP ratio, but the most effective health you are going to get from resistances. And you don't really care that much about health on Udyr. It's not a bad stat, but it's not super useful either. The easiest way to get tankier is by buying some resistances on this champion, especially because you already get a lot of health from your first root items. Okay. And we'll talk more about the build order once we go over the items. But when it comes to Demon's Plate, it's usually going to be your second item, simply because it has some strengths that are unique to Demon's Plate that other items don't have. And it's not really purely a tank item, it's kind of a fighter, damage-ish item, because the proc does a lot of damage. And most people still don't understand that Demon's Plate has on-hit damage. As long as you move a few units between auto attacks, you don't have to waste any auto attack uptime, you don't lose DPS on auto attacks. Just move a little bit, don't stand still, and you'll get on-hit damage. So it's an on-hit item. And the proc, initial one with 100 stacks, of course, does quite a bit of damage. Then you have the movement speed, which allows you to gap close. You're not gonna get kited easily with the slow resist on top of that. And it also makes you faster on the map. So Demon's Plate is amazing because it's a tank item that speeds up your clear. You deal more damage to camps, you move faster on the map. It's the main strength, this is why we love Demon's Plate. It's an amazing item for this champion, because it also makes your tempo faster. If you were to build like a Thornmail, you would clear significantly slower than Deadman's Plate and make it in different places on the map way slower. So that's why Deadman's Plate is so amazing, and it's kind of a core item that you should be looking to build in most cases, unless some more conditional items are more valuable. Okay, and one of those items can be Unending Despair. It has 15 haste, which still gives you some DPS and mobility, but is going to be amazing when you're playing against mostly low-range melee comps. Like Demon's Plate can be really useful to gap close against more mixed types of champions, but Unending Despair is going to be simply strong when a lot of people are around you, because the healing is based on each target hit. If you hit 5 players, you get insane healing from Unending Despair. And it also has some extra synergy where it can stack Conqueror, and it can also trigger Liandry's Burn. So there's some extra synergy there with those items. Other things to consider about Unending Despair, once again mostly against melee comps, to stat check them, is that it's going to work based on post-mitigation damage. So any kind of magic pen or damage amplification or magic resistance on the enemies is going to change the healing that you're going to get. So if your team is very magic damage heavy, you might want to consider not buying this item if they are showing that they are going to build some magic resistance items, or just have tanks in general that will automatically build some MR items, because the healing will be rather small in that case. Even then, you will probably want to buy Bloodletter's Curse for magic penetration or even Abyssal Mask to amplify this a bit. Okay, Frozen Heart is just going to be amazing against like a heavy auto-taker comp that really gets ruined by the 20% attack speed slow. Useful for yourself and your teammates, great for dueling and team fighting. It's pretty cheap. Frozen Heart is just going to do the job, and of course with 20 haste, if you want to buy it as a second item, it's going to still give you decent DPS, utility, mobility. But on the other hand, Randuin is something that you usually buy more later into the build. Randuin, you know, people have to get crit chance first, and Frozen Heart is still going to be more useful. In most cases, they have to get to around 3 crit items breakpoint, and you can also of course buy both, but you want Randuin when they are getting on their usually 4th item, or it could be your 4th, 5th item. The earliest I would buy Randuin is on my 3rd legendary item, for sure. If they have stuff like Yasuo, Yone, probably. So it could be multiple champions, but this is of course insane durability against crit auto attacks. And because it has health, which Roadheart doesn't, it's also going to scale with, let's say, Wraithmaker or Dusk and Dawn, which have the HP ratios. That's something to keep in mind, even though it's small amounts. Can turn the tides in their favor just a little bit. Thornmail, you want to complete it as your last item after you get Bramble Vest. Bramble Vest, amazing component against on-hit healing. Like, don't just buy this against Soraka, Vladimir, Soin. It has to be on-hit healing that the enemy possesses. And you try to complete it as late as possible, just sit on Bramble Vest, no problem. Okay, now let's look at magic resistance items. Abyssal Mask is usually my common choice, especially if it's early into the game. And that is because it has a lot of ability haste and it amplifies your damage. These items are more damage oriented than Mass and Abyssal Mask. They give you more agency to finish a kill yourself, to burst somebody down, to clear a bit faster, and so on, right? You know, before somebody's able to collapse and help them, damage is very useful to have in general. And it's also amplify the damage of your teammates, of course. It's a pretty cheap item, Abyssal Mask overall. It does the job for Udyr, especially if you are playing any of these items that are a bit more melee focused with Shin or Riftmaker, while Liandry, you're gonna be in a bunch of situations, still good for Liandry builds of course, where you're not going to be in range for the Abyssal Mask, because your R Awaken is going to, you know, deal damage from a distance. Okay, then we usually like Kenny Kruka, simply because it's really useful against Burst. And Poke. Really strong if you want to counter magic damage, but keep in mind it's only good against magic damage, so there might be more mixed options that can be useful in that case. Force of Nature, really strong against dots and stuff like that, because you get 10% movement speed, you can avoid getting kited. Very high effective felt if you get this magic resistance. Magic damage champions pretty much don't deal damage if they don't get void stuff, any other Force of Nature stacked. You just have to be aware of when it's easy to stack. Keep in mind that certain on-hit effects, just like having a Kaisa or something, can stack Force of Nature pretty easily. And then if you consider Spirit Visage, which is something a lot of people buy on Udyr, my answer to that would be that Spirit Visage is not a very good item in the way that people view it. Spirit Visage is the best item against a lot of mixed damage and physical damage in general. And most of the time, you'll be able to go for other items, such as Jaksho, which are also good against mixed damage. Spirit Visage overall is something that I would buy if there is like one magic damage dealer. And I also have some synergy with other things, such as enchanters or healing items, and then you can maybe consider Spirit Visage. But Abyssal Mask would still be the other side of the coin, where you get kind of the same stats, but you also deal more damage. But if they have heavy magic damage dealers, you always want Force of Nature or Kenny Kruka. They're just like much stronger against magic damage, even if you have enchanters. It's not about having enchanters on the team or something like that, which is what people usually point out to. It's literally about, well, they have like one magic damage dealer, mostly physical damage, maybe some true damage, I want Spirit Visage, because this passive and these stats are a lot more forgiving. You can get hit by an AD carry, and Spirit Visage is going to be a lot more useful than Force of Nature or Kenny Krukan, which are just more specific, more conditional items. Okay, there's also something that's kind of like an MR item and an armor item. It scales with both, and it's quite generalistic. We have Protoplasm, put in both sections. So why would you ever want to build this item on Udyr? It's going to be great against burst damage, if you think you can get one shot. It's also going to be great at getting your second awaken off from the level 11 to level 16 especially, but even after level 16 it can be very useful, depending on your build. It can be strong for like full frontline, full tank builds, where you're not really going for more of these mask AP items. But I especially like it in synergy with Dusk and Dawn, for example. Dusk and Dawn is going to refund my passive quicker, and Protoplasm is going to allow me to survive for longer, so I can get my Awaken refunded even easier with a Protoplasm. And it also does scale with Rift and Dusk and Dawn with a high amount of health. Combine that with 20 haste, which, like I said, haste does improve your quality and DPS. And we also have to talk a bit about another Udyr concept, which is if you have any sort of idea about how Udyr works, you'll realize it's a pretty 6 seconds cooldown. But all the effects are 4 seconds duration. The R is 4 seconds, the E is 4 seconds, the W, the Q, they are all 4 seconds. In order to get your cooldowns to 4 seconds as well, you need about 50 haste. And I would say that is the soft cap for haste on Udyr. You can get really high amounts of haste on Udyr, they're gonna be fine. But the most important is to try to get to 50 haste. It's not mandatory, you can play with lower amounts, but I would say that's the sweet spot. So if you can have something like Legend Haste, plus Riftmaker, plus Protoplasm, that's 50 haste. And that's the most, you know, slowing and movement speed you can get for the most part. Okay, now let's go over the capstone items, which are simply items that I want you to have an eye on in the late game, which is Jackshaw. There's also Warmog, and for more AP heavy builds, we have Deadcap. So yeah, these items just multiply with other items, and you want to have at least one of them in a full build almost every single time on Udyr. If you're stacking some resistances, you can go Jackshaw. It's going to amplify everything well to be even more durable, especially against mixed damage. This does make the most sense, and can also be a solo MR or solo armor item. Let's say you've been stacking some MR items, and they still have some physical damage, and you feel like you want to get some armor, you slap on the Jackshaw, is going to multiply with the force of nature, for example, and then still give you a decent amount of armor. But you definitely don't want to build this on like a AP heavy build or with Protoplasm and stuff like that. It just has to have some resistances to back it up, otherwise it's just not going to be very efficient because the item by itself doesn't give much stats. This is a Giant's Belt, a Chain Vest, and a Negatron Cloak. It's a pretty expensive item. Now for sieging, and when you play against a lot of penetration and reductions and true damage, I really prefer Warmog's Armor because you're going to have like 1000 extra life over all the other items, and it's also going to scale with some ratios like Unending Despair, for example. And you can make Udyr really obnoxious when you're trying to siege the enemy base with Baron. You can just tank all of their abilities, combine that with your W, walk out, you can always disengage with E Awaken, of course, and regenerate back with Warmog's Armor. There have been a bunch of games where I've been doing this thing, and it helps to close out the game in late game. And yeah, if you play against Wukong with Black Cleaver, Kog'Maw, stuff like that can shred your resists easily, or just a lot of true damage, Warmog can also be a useful capstone. And of course, if I'm going like a very AP heavy build, I'm going to go for Rabadon. And talking about AP items, I guess we should mention that earlier. And I'm also going to explain to you guys when you should go for more AP builds compared to just going tank. We'll have to have Riftmaker. Riftmaker is just like super stat tricky, nothing too complicated if you're an AP fighter. If you buy some HP items, Riftmaker is always going to be a strong option. By default, like, it's just stats. It's really good stats. And it's generally strong. If you think you just want to deal more damage because you're against a bruiser fighter team, you can go for Riftmaker. If you think you're gonna get out-sustained because the enemy team has too much healing, if their team is mostly like Swain, Aatrox, stuff like that, you might want to go more damage-oriented, because if you go tank, you'll just tickle them, they will ignore you. If you want to have very strong zone control and poke against champions that you don't really want to tank anyway, like a Vayne. I usually go full AP against Vayne, because I can just drop R on her head, I don't have to worry about tanking her. So that's another thing you can consider. Vayne, Kog'Maw, stuff like that, maybe even Anivia, which is also vulnerable to your R Awaken, since she has no mobility, 325 base MS. Yeah, you can go Riftmaker. It's kinda hard to go wrong with this item, especially as a third item in the match. because it does speed up everything. If you go for a pure tank item, you're not going to have the extra damage to camps, objectives, towers. Dueling is also really strong with Riftmakers. You just really have to weigh in the trade-offs, gain some experience, and be able to tell when it's going to be better or not. Now, on the other hand, we have Bloodletter's Curse, which is similar, but it's gonna be really good against MR stack and to amplify your team's damage. One of the reasons why going magic damage Udyr in general is not that bad even if your team is full AP is because you have Bloodletter's Curse. You can amplify damage now, you can shred magic resistance. And this can be really useful even as a second item if your team is magic damage heavy and they're already starting to build some magic resistance. Keep an eye out for Bloodletter's Curse. Can be really useful because Udyr can stack it extremely quickly, just drop R on their head and in like 1 to 2 seconds everything should be maxed out. One of the better items you can make use of on this champion, I would say. And of course Udyr is really good at applying Oblivion. Same thing with Tormil, don't just finish it super early. But you should be able to get great value from Oblivion Orb. It's very easy to apply this because you're a tanky character, you have AoE damage, you're in the middle of opponents, you can apply it from a bit of range as well. You know, if it's a mage, maybe it gets engaged and dies at the start of the fight, and then you have nothing to apply Oblivion Orb with, but Udyr is gonna last through most fights, so it's just one of the best Oblivion Orb carriers. And the stats on Morello aren't even bad. They are just, you know, almost as good as Rift, better than Liandry, a bit better than Bloodletter's Curse, pretty cheap item. Nothing really wrong with it if you really want it. And of course, the healing that you reduce can be way greater than the damage amplification from Bloodletter or Riftmaker or something like that, even Liandry sometimes. Depends on the levels of healing they have. So, definitely consider buying at least Oblivion or Udyr. Now, if I want to go for an AP heavy build, and when would I go for an AP heavy build? As I mentioned, if maybe I'm solo AP or dealing with a lot of bruises and tanks with sustain, or if I just don't think tank items are super valuable because I'm playing against maybe too much damage or penetration, I just concluded that, hey man, it's not really easy to tank damage this game. I'll just go full AP. Sometimes I'll be super far behind and I will go full AP. Because if you're down 10k gold, 15k gold, you're not going to be able to tank the damage of the fed enemies. It might be best to go AP heavy to try to make a comeback with more damage since you're probably gonna die anyway. And you might as well just suicide and deal as much AoE damage as possible. So in those cases, all of those mentioned cases, the build will usually be Liandry with Riftmaker and Bloodletter's Curse, right? All the mask items are gonna be efficient for the AP fighter archetype. And then I kinda ran out of options, there's no more mask items, you can only get 3 of them. So I'll probably build a Shadow Flame. And that's gonna be like the max damage output that I can have for the most part. So that's something I usually consider. And another thing on these AP heavy builds, I don't really like Zonia as much on Udyr, because you don't want to stun yourself, you want to be able to move around. But if you're playing against key abilities that you know is going to be powerful to ignore, and you look for more situational durability, since you're already pretty squishy on an AP heavy build, then I would consider to buy Zonia. It's definitely not bad on Udyr, because you can drop our Awaken, press Zonia, and the effect will still trigger. Of course, you'll still be able to damage and slow enemies while inside of Zonias. The last item in this category of like offense, just call this offense, would be Void Staff. This is extremely situational when you have something like a Singed that already went Bloodletters and the enemies have MR items. And in that case, you might want to go Void Staff if there's no other way to deal damage. But this will be something like a 1% or like a even less thing. I just want you guys to have it as an option, because it's something that I do build sometimes, even if it's like a few times per season, now that Bloodletters is in the game. Okay, so another thing I want to discuss here is the Snowball items. So this is Capstone. Once again, you can check out my Patreon for item sets on a bunch of other champions, including this one. You can download it and have it in your own client. So this will be for Snowball. If I'm really fed, especially on a Liandry build, Magic Pen skills with Liandry Burn, of course, good for poking and zoning people, I'll go Storm Surge. It gives you insane nuke, and it makes clearing very, very fast. This can be my second item, my third item. Usually you want to build these Snowball items pretty early, so second or third. And it's going to unleash your power. And what is the logic behind it? Why do we want to go Storm Surge on Udyr? It kind of makes no sense, it's a glass cannon item, right? Well, if you are really far ahead, if you are 7 kills early, 10 kills early, something crazy like that, which does happen in some games, of course, you can go Storm Surge to make it even easier to snowball, because you'll be just as tanky as you would normally be, right? Think about it. You have a huge goal, might as well invest it into some cheap items that can surprise enemies with a lot of damage, because yeah, you will literally be able to outplay opponents, and the outplay is that they will get one-shot by Q Awaken or R Awaken, and then they will press tab and they will realize, what the fuck is this Udyr damage? And of course it speeds up everything. You can clear faster, do objectives faster, more damage to towers. This will be the power of Storm Surge. And if you didn't get a taste of it, just try it once when you have a game where you're really fed with good CS, and you will see what I mean. I don't recommend this if you're a noob, but for the people that have a bit of experience on Udyr, especially if you're like Diamond Master, you should definitely try this in some games, because you will see that it just makes the game even easier. Same thing with Gunblade. This is just a different flavor. I'll maybe consider it a bit more on the builds that I'm auto-attacking, such as like with Lichbane and Dusk and Dawn, Gunblade has some extra synergy, right? And now with the AD ratios on W and E, Gunblade can be pretty strong. It does give you some sustain to stay on the map for longer, to take the entire enemy jungle and stuff like that on rotation. But if you want something that's just a bit more utility and tankiness, you can also go Cosmic Drive. I buy this. What I think these are a bit too glass cannon. And of course the mobility and tankiness from Cosmic Drive is just going to allow me to do some crazy shit. So definitely can be good. I'm just thinking that when the game is more even though Cosmic Drive makes some sense on Udyr, the other items are a bit better, because this just lacks a bit in the damage department. You don't get the amplifications, the magic penetration, but you get a lot more utility, which is really great when you are fed, because you're not going to care about like a damage plate or force of nature. So this can also be like a damage plate replacement, where you get movement speed, but instead a lot more damage instead of armor. So that's kind of how these things with the Phoenix Udyr build would look like. Armor, resist, boots, and everything. And we kind of just went through and made a build together, explain the ideas, and you should now get a better idea about when to purchase these items. Now let's go a bit about the skill order as well. Sorry, I mean the item order. It's been like an hour in this video, and we still have to go for the QMAX. So hopefully you can learn a lot from these things. Okay, we have Liandry, and let's say we buy some boots, medical insurance. So what would be the usual second item? In my opinion, you want something that at least has a lot of ability haste, so that the clear and the damage in fights doesn't feel lackluster. So when it comes to the tank items, of course we could go Riftmaker on this slot, depending on the game. But as I explained, that split is going to be amazing. But what happens if you don't want armor? Let's say you want magic resistance. In that case, you would go Abyssal Mask, because Abyssal Mask has damage, has ability haste. It'll be useful for what I mentioned. And at least you want to have something like Protoplasm, Unending Despair, maybe Frozen Heart. You really don't want a Rendwin or a Canik Rukan on your second item. I really advise you to avoid this. Try to buy it on your third item slot, because especially if you buy a Liandry, which has 0 ability haste, then going into another item with 0 haste is just going to be pretty inefficient. Like, not only is it going to feel bad, but on paper, kind of inefficient, because you're not speeding up your clear, and on Udyr, even on your second item, you're still mostly looking to collect resources. And these items can be pretty strong at fighting, so it's not really that big of a deal. And as I said, when you go for these items, Dusk and Dawn on the other side. For some reason I cannot find it. Maybe it's not in these categories. I guess I'll just type it, guys. Dusk and Dawn, okay. Cannot find it, I cannot buy it. Oh, there it is. And some boots. And I would like to have Protoplasm. And this is usually a pretty solid build for Dusk and Dawn, as I mentioned. But let's say then I still want something like Randuin, because I'm playing against Yasuo Yone. And then I can follow up with, let's say, Jaksho to scale up these items, and be even tankier. And Riftmaker is something that you would usually want to have in most completed builds. Looks like it was here on Mage, maybe I didn't see it, I guess I'm stupid. And these are some of the ideas that I would use to make a build. And it's really going to depend on a lot of other variables. If I'm playing Lichbane, let's say I went Lichbane, and then I went Demon's Plate second. I have a lot of damage proc, movement speed. I would usually like to make space for a Riftmaker as my third item, because then I can scale the Lichbane proc with a lot of Riftmaker damage. And then you can go, let's say, maybe Spirit Visage, and then maybe my last item could be a Jaksho, or potentially even a Rabadon. Maybe I have Magi, and I sell my boots. So these are some of the things you can do for sure. What else really? Like I mentioned, you can have these mass builds, you can even have, let's say, we go crazy, Sork Shoes, Bloodletter, Riftmaker, and then we take Shadow Flame, and then we take Deadcap. So I'm a bit laid back on my chair. These are some potential things you can do. You just have to think about all the variables, and you just have to combine the information that I taught you when I went over every single item. And whether you go more damage focused or more tank focused is going to be up to you. But I'm telling you, it's kind of important to have at least a second AP item in your full build in most cases, because for example Riftmaker does make you quite tanky, especially later on with the AP and sustain. So you don't have to go full tank. But in some games it can be good depending on your role. That's just going to be up to you to decide. And some of the tankiest builds could potentially be something like, well, I have Dusk and Dawn, I'm going Protoplasm, I'm going Frozen Heart, let's say Spirit Visage, and then either Jaksho or Warmog. And this can be like one of the tankiest builds possible, because instead of getting Liandry, you will get an item that has 20 haste plus a lot of healing. So this is kind of like the immortal Udyr build. If you have something like this with Resolve, for example, you will essentially be close to unkillable against certain comps. But of course, tanks don't scale that well into late game, so you have to be able to judge how hard their carries can scale if you want to go full tank, etc. Now, I think it's time we discuss a bit when you should go AP, when you should go AD, you know, QR, max, stuff like that. If you think about Qmax Udyr, it's pretty simple. It just does single target damage, does auto-attack damage, so it's going to excel at side maining, it's going to excel at dueling, it's going to be stronger in certain matchups, it's going to be strong when the enemy team is vulnerable to split pushing. So that's the main reason I would ever choose to go Qmax. If I'm against Mastery, or Olaf, maybe Mordekaiser, Gwen, it's really hard to duel those champions in some cases with Armex. So you have to consider going Qmax. If enemy team is low crowd control, you can also consider going Qmax. If the enemy team has a lot of CC, they are vulnerable to poke, to being controlled with your aura. If you want to have AoE damage because they are going to stack together with a bunch of bruisers, then Armex is going to make more sense. It's also going to be depending on your team composition. If you have too much magic damage, maybe go Qmax. If you have too much physical damage, maybe go Armex. But sometimes you can override it. You can have a full AP team and still choose to go Armex because the enemy team cannot itemize MR easily, or because QMax is looking a bit unplayable. Since you have access to Bloodletter, right? We have Bloodletter. We can amplify the damage of our teammates and get through some of those magic resist items. A lot of magic resist items are not easy to build. Maw of Marmortius, Mercurial Scimitar with Sand, they don't even give that much magic resistance. Banshee Veil is only 40 MR. So you can definitely go AP even if your team is full AP. And you can definitely go QMax if your team is full AD, if the enemy has like a Master E or something and you really want to be stronger against him to try and shut him down. A lot of other things that will make QMax pretty bad, pay attention, is characters with stealth and things that deny auto attacks that can block, such as Jax or Nila. If you play against a bunch of those characters like Akali, Nila, Jax, Kiana, you cannot really auto attack them with Q. So you have to potentially go Armex. Armex is very strong against stealth champions. So it's really gonna depend a lot on the matchups as well. That's how I would choose between QMax and Armex. Of course, there are some more nuances that are maybe not easy to explain. But as I said, Q, great for dueling, split pushing, is gonna get countered by stealth and blockers. Armex, great for AoE, for poke, zone control, and even for teamfighting in general. So that would be kind of the summary. Now, let's make another item set and begin to look at a QMax build. The first thing that I would go over was we go just AD and health. Same thing as the other concepts. The first one is Spear of Shojin. This item stacks very quickly on Udyr because of how his abilities work. And it also gives you a lot of tankiness. You get 450 life and 25 haste for your W and E. So Spear of Shojin makes you a lot tankier. It gives you a lot of clear speed from the damage amplification. Very strong for dueling and for bursting. You go Spear of Shojin, you can still nuke squishy targets, even tankier targets in early game. So it's pretty flexible. Of course, the haste makes your E and R cooldown lower, so you can gap close and stick to targets a bit better. And you also just have a lot of stat checking power, simply because Spear of Shojin, not only the item has quite a lot of stats, the way it's designed compared to most items in the game, but it's very easy to stack the passive and keep it up on this character. This would be my standard that I would look to build pretty much every game. Although in some matches I will start with Shrybreaker, when Shrybreaker is very threatening if it really makes the difference in early game to gap close and kill certain champions. If you play against the Talia, for example, you'll be able to touch her with Shrybreaker and you will kill her, right? Against the Lilia, against the Hecarim, Shrybreaker can be very useful. And it's never really too bad on Udyr to rush. It's just that Shojin is a bit more stat-checky and it's cheaper. Also builds out of pickaxe, which you can get in early game. And yeah, if you gain more experience, you'll be able to judge these choices a bit better. Shojin, just like stat-checking, and Shrybreaker would be for more ranged champions, or stuff that can disengage easily. But you also have to keep in mind that against certain characters, it's gonna be kind of redundant, like you'll go Shrybreaker. Not redundant necessarily, but sort of pointless. And you'll still not be able to catch up to them easily with Shrybreaker, so you might as well go Shojin and try to rely on your cooldowns being lower. Okay, the third item that I usually have as the root for QMax is Trinity Force. And Trinity Force, the main purpose would be, of course, it's in a vacuum a good item on Udyr. It has nice stats, you can easily proc Shin. It's just that Shojin is better at bursting and makes you tankier. Shrybreaker has much better utility, so there's just not much point to build Trinity Force. But where this item is still useful is it can scale well into a split pushing playstyle. If you only want to focus on splitting and dealing as much damage to towers as possible, and you don't really think that you need a utility from these items, then you can start with Trinity Force. It's a bit more annoying to build, and it doesn't even have that much AD, you know, only 36 to scale with your Q, but it is pretty stat checky and it's going to be useful for that niche. And you can combine it later with stuff like Hullbreaker and so on. Alright, for the jungle pets, you know, if you want to stat check and be tanky, go green, most of the time go blue. Red pet, I would say never useful on this type of Udyr. Have no real value from it, so we don't have to discuss it. We can also go over the runes. Press the attack would be the best overall because you can burst people. We could grass for executing, you know, just hunting people down. Same thing with the shards. And then I would also have something like this for the most part, where you're just trying to get as many stats as possible. Something where you go, let's say, Celerity plus Nimbus Cloak can also be nice for gap closing if you get a bit kited. Even Triple Tonic Approach Velocity is not too bad. And I'll usually go Sudden Impact with Relentless or Treasure Hunter, maybe Relentless on Qmax Udyr, since you cannot rely on your R as much, and you just want to get in range to hit people and kind of assassinate them. And of course you can even go something like Conditioning Overgrowth. This is mostly what I would do with a Press the Attack page. Now for other pages, Storm Raider Surge can function quite well. We will not go for Axiom Arcanist because the damage amplification only works on the lightning. We are not building AP, so the lightning doesn't deal much damage. I would rather have Nimbus Cloak so it's easier to gap close, which is a bit different when you're playing Qmax. And then of course we can go Triumph with Legend Haste. Alacrity is also pretty decent, but Haste scales everything else. Alacrity only gives you damage, Haste gives you damage and potentially even, you know, utility, tankiness. I really prefer it. Storm Raider Surge would be good against characters that have some kind of disengage, and if you can quickly trigger it, you can, which you can because you have a lot of burst damage on Q at all stages, you can catch up to them after they use their disengage. So think of Gangplank if he barrels you. You can ignore some of the slow and still catch up to him. Can be good to match other people with Storm Raider. Like Vladimir, maybe Vayne condemns you and you got your hit off, you can catch up to it. I'm trying to think of some situations. We could definitely think more or take some notes, but I think you guys will understand the general idea, will still be able to integrate this into your own games. Another thing that you can run, which is a little bit viable, is Sail Blades. If you want to like deal as much burst as possible, you can go for a page like this. It's definitely not terrible. If you really want to just completely nuke squishy targets as fast as possible. Like PTA has a lot more DPS with a burst damage, but never bother going Little Tempo or Conqueror on Qmax Udyr. It's just pointless, because you just have way too much damage. You will kill even tanks in a few auto attacks, and Press the Attack gives you DPS anyway with the amplification. It's just the most consistent rune. This would be my runes for Qmax Udyr anyway. Now, if we are to talk about more builds, all you have to understand is that you will need some kind of Tiamat item for your second item, right? So it will either be Strybreaker, Titanic, or Profane. Strybreaker is something that I want to have in almost every build that I play. And the reason you want to have a Tiamat item second, in my opinion, this is what feels the best, is because you'll usually try to collect a lot of resources with Qmax, and it makes it easier to split push and take waves. Plus, these items are pretty efficient on their own. Even in a vacuum without the wave clear part, they are not bad items. So you definitely want, at least on your second item, pretty much every single game I go for a Tiamat item. You can play without it, but you are going to miss out on a lot of potential with the way that you want to play Udyr in the game, with split pushing and stuff like that. Pressuring side lane, really potent on QMax Udyr. Or just trying to create a number advantage. The Schreibecker overall is going to make it easy to deal your hits and kill targets. You can pretty much go Schreibecker every single game and it's not going to be bad. Now, if you don't think you care at all, you can easily kill targets. They don't kite you at all, they don't have any disengage. Maybe they're a bit more melee. You can go for Titanic. It just has 150 more HP, a little bit more DPS, so nothing wrong with it. Now, if you are maybe a bit more ahead and you want to get the item faster, because Profane Hydra is a lot cheaper, you can also go for this option. It's a bit more snowbally, I would say. Profane Hydra, a slightly overtuned item. You can definitely buy it on Udyr. I have a video on it on my second channel. Definitely try buying Tiamat item every game. Okay, so for boots, we'll just want something like Swiftness or Mercs to help us against getting CC'd. Abyss, Ionian, if nothing else is good. And of course the Omnivan boots have the same thing as the Armex, except we cannot go for Magic Penetration. I wanna say that the attack speed boots are really worth it. You know, you'd rather just go Ionian at that point and have just a bit of haste for. Okay, so generally on QMax Udyr, you want to be damage oriented. You don't really want to buy tank items, because AD gives you some shielding and movement speed as well, so it's even better now. You really care about your dueling, your damage to towers, your damage to objectives and stuff like that. You're not really looking to tank damage. You are the more offensive stance. On Armex, it's easier to go full tank because you have more base damage. But for QMax, if you want to get the most juice out of it, I think you should, not that it's impossible to build tank here, but I think you should go for more AD, especially because the AD bruiser items are usually have a more impactful defensive potential, such as Death Dance. It's kind of a tank item. The AP fighter items don't really make you that much tankier, for the most part. Same thing with Maw of Malmortius. And then, you know, makes sense, Death Dance is going to be really strong at team fighting, dueling physical damage champions. All of the stats are going to be used. And if you want to team fight, it's pretty much mandatory to go Death Dance, at least in a full build on QMax Udyr. These items are pretty powerful for AD fighters. If you really care about armor pen, which you don't really need that much on Udyr, because you have really high percentage damage against tanks, but keep in mind you can proc this AoE with, let's say, Titanic on multiple players. So if you have Malphites and Ramuses and stuff like that, you can consider Black Cleaver. Wouldn't really be my first option, and same thing, Kempa Chainsword. These are items that I rarely buy. I guess you could also think about Serpent's Fang. These are some anti kind of counter items that you can for sure buy, they're not bad. And if you want to teamfight a bit better, sometimes you can also go for Sundered Sky, but other items usually take priority. Like Dance or Maw are usually going to be better. There's also Stella's Gauge, so if you think you cannot build those items for some reason, or if you want something that's more mixed value and you think you can switch between targets easily, then Sundered Sky can definitely be good at teamfighting. But again, it's just mostly a team. Yeah, it's mostly a team fighting item. And when it comes to Shojin and Trinity Force, I'm not really looking to buy them later on. I think they're just gonna be a bit better options. It's not impossible. But if I didn't buy them on my first slot, I don't really care about them later. Because I'm gonna have stuff like Death Dance or Sterax or Overlord's Bloodmail, which I guess we can go over in a second. But when it comes to armor items for tank, all you can really go is Randuin and Frozen Heart. If you really want to counter some specific champions, I don't really go for Thornmail. I would rather just straight up go Camp on Chainsword if I really need healing reduction, because I want to prioritize having attack damage items on QMax. And when it comes to magic resistance, Same thing, I'd rather have like Mo or Armor DD in most cases, right? But it'll still be these options. Speed Visage can also be really nice if you combine it with Stella's Gauge, on the Sky, Desden, stuff like that. But I'm not looking to go for, let's say, an Unending Despair or an Abyssal Mask. Like, these are not items that you ever want to buy on QMax with the way the character plays. If you buy these tank items, it's still usually for your stat checking and dueling potential against a lot of magic damage champions, Force of Nature. These are mostly, they're like pretty AP heavy. While Speed Visage, if you just want a fatter HP bar, when you combine your W Awaken with Stellax or something, it can be somewhat useful. So now let's go over the capstone items, which will be, I guess they're building out of Tunneler for the most part. Silence Gauge, great for team fighting, but also for dueling, hypers, champions, assassins, stuff like that. Can be a big spike. Overlords, which is just going to give you a big amount of damage instead of shielding. It's just like a more statuary item. And of course you can build both after the other. Hullbreaker, which is crucial for a split pushing playstyle. It's also decently statted for fighting. If you can get 5 hits off, you have a lot of attack speed. So it's not only for that, and it's always going to be useful at sieging if you want to get it later on to break the entire enemy base with Baron. Because all of these effects work around your teammates. A lot of people might think that you still have to be isolated to be Hullbreaker buffed. You don't. You can just buff the minions when your teammates are near you. And sometimes I do buy Endless Hunger if I don't have better options, if I maybe went more Malmortius, and I cannot go Stellax and stack some HP items. And it's also a very good boot replacement. If you get like really late game, it's going to give you insane haste and AD, so these are going to make you faster, which kind of allows you to replace boots. And of course, if we were to talk about snowball items, the best one by far is Yomu's Ghostblade. If you buy this second or third, when you are really fed, you just run around the map, kill people, one-shot them, and if you want some like really funny, insane, crazy one-shot potential, you can fuck around with Voltaic Cyclosword. Although I rarely buy this, but you know, if I have 10 kills and I just want to kill somebody before they can react, and have like insane clears and stuff like that, I might go Voltaic Cyclosword. But in general, you don't really want to buy Lethality on Udyr except maybe Profane, which is for the wave clear utility. And this would overall be my build for the QMax Udyr. I will briefly go over the skill order. So for Armex, of course we max R first, and then we put 3 points in E, followed by W max. I found this is the sweet spot, 3 points in E, so you can have some mobility on the map, because you just care about ganking people, collecting resources, you don't care about points in W early game. You are not frontlining. And then, by the time you're level 16, when your Awaken is low cooldown, is when you also get 6 points in your W with this skill order. So, Armax, 3 points E, 6 points W, and then continue to max your E, of course, with 1 point in each ability by level 4. This is the sweet spot, for sure. 6 points W at level 16, your Awaken is the lowest cooldown it can be. You can get multiple Awaken Ws in the fight that way, if necessary, and you have more items to sort of frontline and play longer fights. Now for the Q max, I simply max Q, and then fully max my E, because I already win a lot of skirmishes. I just want to be as fast as possible on the map, and then you can still max W by late game and have a bit more stat efficiency. But points in the E on the Q max will just overall be more valuable. You're not gonna get a lot of W because a lot of W cast, because the Q Awaken with 80 items is usually going to make fights, which is usually duels that you are taking with Q max, pretty short. That's why the E max just has a lot more ambient value, because you're constantly using it to traverse the map and get a rush to kill people. That's pretty much it with the skill order. Brainstorming to this idea, just doing an uncut video was kind of fun. Like I said, you guys can check my Patreon for more content, where I would go more in depth into giving you some build examples, because here I just went over the general ideas. And you can also check out my secondary channel, follow my stream, all of that stuff. Stay tuned, because I'll update the Volibear guide, and then we have like some more ideas were, Jax, Mordekaiser, Aprox, of course, other champions that I play. After I do my usual champion picks, I'm going to expand more into other stuff that I might practice myself, or even things from other roles and such that I don't even play. Who wouldn't want a Yumi guide for the Eagles? Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. G motherfucking G.